We are in eastern Africa, northern Uganda to be precise, along the border with Sudan, where the U.S. military is in the midst of a 2-week operation called Natural Fire 10. The Americans are training troops from Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi in hand-to-hand combat, crowd control, logistics, communications.
500 U.S. soldiers are here in northern Uganda. They're here on a temporary operation, and it's one of many they'll make throughout Africa. They say they're here to build military capacity and improve relations with the local people.
There's my crowd over here.
These soldiers are all part of AFRICOM, a new unified command for the growing U.S. military commitments in Africa.
Move him over here. Move him over.
Part of AFRICOM's purpose, of course, is to combat the spread of terrorism and extremism from places like Somalia and Sudan. But there's something else at stake here, just as vital as containing terrorism. General William Ward is the commander of AFRICOM.
For us, as Americans, the continent of Africa, which is rich in resources, is potential for markets. As we develop relationships, as we help them with their own security issues, those are in our best interest. Not that we want to dominate or monopolize, but that so things are available in free, open, competitive ways that are benefiting the people of Africa.
In other words, currying favor with African people and their governments to make Africa safe and open for U.S. investment. But the U.S. has big competition here from the world's emerging superpower, China. The Chinese are pouring money into Africa. This year, China's foreign direct investment in Africa is up more than 77%. And over the last decade, China's trade with Africa has multiplied 10 times to more than $100 billion. It's part of China's global shopping spree, a quest for natural resources like copper, oil, timber, needed to sustain the country's rapid economic growth. With all this money comes power and influence for the Chinese. And this is what many say AFRICOM was created to combat. Ian Taylor is a professor of international relations at the University of St. Andrews.
A response to the rise of China in Africa is part of the thinking behind why AFRICOM and other initiatives to place Africa in a more important role in American foreign policy is there.
At stake is access to markets and resources. In other words, lots and lots of money.
This new scramble for Africa is simply a reflection of the rise of the importance of Africa in international relations in general, whether we're talking about the development of AFRICOM, or the rise of the Chinese, or the rise of the Indians, or whoever in the continent. It's a reflection that after 15 years of relative neglect, after the end of the Cold War, Africa is now re-emerging as a centre of international attention.
To see the Chinese economic juggernaut, I came here to Lusaka, the capital of Zambia. I visited a Chinese-owned plastics factory, Shunya Enterprises, where employees make shopping bags and shrink wrap. Zhou Zhiqing manages this factory.
For this land, they are undeveloped. So we came here, we can find a good chance to improve ourselves and to help Africa to improve. We can find our profit here, and also African also can benefit from the investment from China.
Throughout Africa, Chinese companies, many government-controlled, are providing jobs, infrastructure, and investment.
We provide more than 100 job opportunity here, and we pay them very well compared with other companies.
The Zambian government, facing an impoverished population, welcomes the outside help. And as Chinese companies provide the jobs, African governments provide access to the natural resources China desperately needs. Here in Shambishi Township in northern Zambia, it is copper the Chinese are after. Copper for the millions of miles of electrical lines and telephone cables for China's rapidly growing urban population. The mines are dangerous, cave-ins are common. But Zambians in Shambishi are desperate for work. So desperate that some come here to an open-pit mine, where every day young men dig with shovels, picks, and their bare hands for copper to sell to Chinese buyers. During my visit, some teenagers led me to a cave where they search for the copper.
When we make these tunnels, there are times when we work day and night. There are times when the safety is not checked. You find that an accident occurs and 2 or 3 people die. So we try to remove those people ourselves, and the miners help us sometimes to bury those people. The buyers also help to sponsor the funerals. When we sell like this, when we sell to the Chinese, that is when we make some money to take to the hospital. When someone is sick, at home, or when I'm sick myself.
So they continue coming here and risking their lives to dig for copper.
We don't know if we will die, so we just have faith in God and say, I will make money tomorrow again.
The Chinese company NFC Mining Africa is the big operator here. When I visited their offices, I spoke with a manager who wouldn't give his name. He told us that NFC's operations are a win-win for both China and Zambian workers.
People work together, they can move mountains. So now the Chinese and Zambians are thinking the same way and aiming for the same goals. So we will work better and better.
Half of Zambia's population is unemployed, and here in Shambishi Township, thousands of people have lost their jobs because of the recession. Despite the economic hardship, some Zambians say that the opportunities that come with Chinese investment have too great a cost.
Some say Chinese investors are aggressively pursuing economic opportunities at the expense of safety standards, labor conditions, and human rights. Anti-Chinese sentiment may be stronger here in Zambia than in any other part of Africa. Simmering tensions turned to outright anger after a 2005 explosion at an NFC mining facility.
I sat here at home. I was just alone. Then I heard a huge noise. So I got out of the house, and when I looked up, I just saw something like dust in the air.
Inesi Sinyangwe's 27-year-old son, Howard, worked in the NFC plant, making explosives for Shambishi's copper mines.
Now, I didn't think that it would be at the place where my son works. So I sat down and started thinking to say, no, God, that must be an accident. But I refuse in the name of Jesus. God have mercy. We don't want accidents.
But there was an accident. In the rush to make a deadline, volatile chemicals mixed. Howard Sinyangwe and 49 other people died in the explosion.
When we went to the plant, the Chinese were not even there. They had run away, all of them. They were afraid because if any of them were there, the crowd would not have let them be. And according to those who were with the Chinese, they were saying, you people here in Zambia, 47 people die. For us in China, even 1 million people die, but for this small number, and you are crying like this. That is what they were saying.
I visited the graveyard of victims of the explosion with Inesi and her husband, Bill Sinyangwe. The Sinyangwes received $9,000 from NFC Africa Mining as compensation for Howard's death. But they say that doesn't come close to making up for losing a son.
It's quite very painful to lose a firstborn in this way, in an accident of this nature. Being the firstborn, I as a father, I'm still nursing a terrible wound.
I met more mine workers at a church in Shambishi. Many attend the Pentecostal service every Sunday. Workers told me about abuses by their Chinese employers, and Perthius Shalawo invited me to his home after the service. He worked for NFC Africa Mining for 1.5 years.
If you made a mistake, you come just and start shouting at you, blast at you. But if there's a problem, we have to solve. We are supposed to do this and this and this. But him or them Chinese, they don't do like that. You come and even slap you. I told you to do this, not this.
Perthius works 6 days a week and gets Sundays off. He earns $300 a month. He and other NFC employees staged a protest of low pay and safety standards outside the front gates of NFC's offices in Shambishi.
2 years ago, there was a strike there. Then we were chasing outside with the mine police, not Zambia police. Then inspector of mine police there started to shoot. Then he shot two of my friends. One on the right and the other one here.
Of course, mine strikes are nothing new in Zambia. There have been many complaints about workers' rights in mines run by Western and African companies. An NFC executive I talked to said that the workers are treated and paid very well.
I think their salary levels got raised every year. Some Zambian workers' salaries surpassed Chinese workers' salaries. Many people didn't ask for a raise, but the company raised their salaries anyways. As for safety, mining itself is a dangerous industry. We are actively improving the safety situation.
But critics say that it's not just labor conditions, it's also that Chinese investment props up and enriches corrupt government leaders at the expense of everyday Africans.
The Chinese position argues that development must come first before democracy and the sort of liberal conceptions of human rights that as the West understands it. Now that's all very well, but if you have a situation where an African leader is promoting neither development nor democracy or Western concepts of human rights, then what you end up in is the worst of both worlds.
Many Zambians wonder why, with all this Chinese investment, their lives haven't gotten any better, while they say their leaders seem to get richer every year.
The Chinese are a very aggressive nation.
Presidential candidate Michael Sata has capitalized on anti-Chinese resentment. His rise in popularity came on the heels of violent protests against the NFC explosion in Shambishi.
The first imperialists or colonialists came to look for raw materials. The Chinese have come to Africa for survival. They are not investors. If anything, they are infestors.
Sata has clearly struck a nerve here. When we visited an outdoor market, after only a few minutes, the crowd had grown so large that we had to convince a driver to let us take over his bus to get back to Sata's offices. Hundreds of Africans surrounded the bus during the mile-long drive, chanting and singing songs of support. The crowd forced police to shut down the main street of Lusaka, and the next day Sata and I appeared on the front page of the newspaper. Sata has threatened to deport foreigners that mistreat Zambian workers, and he has said he'd require foreign firms to give Zambians a 25% stake in ownership. During the 2006 presidential election, China threatened to cut ties with Zambia if Sata won.
You saw it for yourself this morning. Those people, they wouldn't be scared for a bullet. You saw the way the policeman wanted to stop them, they just told him, get out. That's how the people are. And you saw it for yourself because these angry stomachs we are creating, the unemployed young people we are creating, boys who can't go to the college, boys and girls who can't go to universities, boys and girls who can't get jobs. You go to our hospitals, you have no drugs. You go to our children who would like to go to school, there are no schools. The Chinese are nothing. Their honeymoon is short-lived. Their honeymoon will remain here as long as we have this corrupt government.
China's presence in Africa, on farms, in factories and copper mines, is growing.
The Chinese presence there is mixed and it's becoming more and more complicated, and the West has to realize this and engage with this, which is going to be difficult in some respects because the West has been used to having Africa as its own, in its backyard, in its back pocket, as it were.
And in places like northern Uganda, the United States is no longer taking anything for granted. The U.S. military is trying to counteract Chinese influence in part with nation building. As part of Operation Natural Fire, U.S. troops rebuilt Kitgum High School. General William Ward, head of AFRICOM, attended the opening ceremony where students performed. After the ceremony, I asked Ward about China's growing presence in Africa.
We welcome any nation that comes to the continent, such as we, with the goal of trying to help things become more stable. And so the things that are being done by other nations of the world, China, the Indians, European nations, us, all of those efforts are, when they are calls to help to create stability, I think it's something that's something we would welcome, and we working together to increase the effects of that stability is something I think we would all seek to do.
Yes, I can give you my phone number.
Major Reggie Cornegay, a civil affairs officer, is responsible for Natural Fire's outreach, like the work done on the high school.
But I don't mind giving out my phone number. Most of the time people will say, why are you giving out your phone number? You know, you're giving them out to so many different people. But in order to stay in touch with the people, you're going to have to be able to communicate with them.
Cornegay's soldiers also ran medical clinics, treating 1,500 people a day while we were there, and they provided assistance to local hospitals. It's all part of AFRICOM's goal of winning hearts and minds, and in Kitgum, it seems to be working.
So, in about a month, I should be back here.
You'll be back.
Yes.
That will be great.
I told you, I said I'm a resident of Kitgum now.
Yeah? That is beautiful.
I'm going to go get my voting card so I can vote.
We're going to give you a name, you know?
There you go.
And which name should we give him? Omara.
Omara.
Omara is a name that the people like you.
Oh, okay.
You will be loved as you are loved now.
Major Cornegay took me to visit families who had recently returned home after years of living in refugee camps. The refugee families had fled a guerrilla group called the Lord's Resistance Army. The rebels waged a 2-decade-long war of terror in this region, kidnapping thousands of children. Florence was never kidnapped. Her loved ones weren't so lucky.
My relatives, most of them were taken, and some came, like my cousin came back like 2 years ago. She went when she was only 8 years. Now she has 4 children.
Children likely fathered by rebels in the Lord's Resistance Army. The insurgent group left Uganda 2 years ago, but Florence feels safer because the U.S. is training local troops to fend off future trouble.
Your coming shows that you are really with us, even spiritually and physically. I know you were maybe spiritually from America, but now physically you are here. You gave us that strength. You show us love.
AFRICOM's missions extend throughout Africa, and many are more humanitarian than military. Like here in Botswana, in southern Africa. Soldiers here build a facility for a non-governmental organization called Stepping Stones, which provides after-school programs for orphans. Canadian Lila Pavey is the program director of Stepping Stones.
The American military helped to create the space that we see here today. It's been had a tremendous impact on the programs that we've been able to offer.
Now Stepping Stones serves 70 children on a daily basis. Most are orphans of the AIDS pandemic.
So before they were in a small house and had a limited number of children. Since the American military came and provided us with this space, we've been able to grow the programs and develop the programs further. But in addition, we've also been able to extend our services to an additional 20 kids.
It's certainly in one's interest to be engaged with the public, and this is one way for our military to be engaged with the public in countries where we have relations, such as Botswana.
But some critics say AFRICOM militarizes U.S. ties with Africa and is an example of U.S. reliance on military might to achieve strategic goals. The response amongst African leaders to the creation of AFRICOM has been mixed.
Some politicians in the continent welcome this and see this as an opportunity for increased engagement. It raises their stature. It provides new sources of investment. Of course, this may or may not consolidate their regimes. Others regard it as posing neo-imperialist threats to the continent. So there's a mixed response to AFRICOM.
China is also providing humanitarian assistance to Africa, but not through its military. In November, China pledged $10 billion in low-interest loans to African countries over the next 3 years and promised to forgive debt on some loans it had previously granted to less developed African nations. And while China does have military agreements with African countries, Ian Taylor says those agreements do not match the scale of AFRICOM.
The Chinese are concerned, I think, that Africa's relations might become militarized, and they're concerned that what they see as primarily political and particularly economic ties to the continent, the presence of AFRICOM is going to introduce a military dimension to this, and the Chinese do not want to get involved in any type of military competition.
For now, China is focused on using economic might in Africa. And in places like Johannesburg, South Africa, they're doing it not only with investment, but also immigration. Chinese immigration to South Africa is booming. 300,000 have immigrated here so far. Huang Jingxing moved to Africa 3 years ago, living first in Mozambique and Cameroon. Last year, he came to South Africa and opened this grocery store.
Chinese are rather poor. We like to work hard. For example, you Americans have holidays, but in China, we don't have that. We work almost every day to make money, sometimes even work overnight. In South Africa, we hired some workers from neighboring countries, and they don't work on Sundays, not even if you offer them extra money.
Huang showed me the small home he shares with several other Chinese immigrants. His children are still in China.
We left them in China as the cost of living here is too high. If they go to school, the cost is too high, but in China they get free education.
Jiang Chen also left his wife and children behind in China. He worked first in the copper mines of Zambia, then moved to Johannesburg to work for the Sany Group, a construction machinery company.
Why are they not setting up the same sorts of businesses and coming here in the same numbers?
I think simply because the European and America doesn't have such amount of people. Yeah, so China have 1.3 billion people.
Workers here are building a water filter and extraction plant, and Sany makes the concrete pumps used in the construction project. Chinese and Africans are working side by side, and site safety manager Ivor Clifford is on hand to make sure employees are abiding by safety rules.
When they started, they weren't very safety orientated. Gradually they begin to understand. One of the problems is we just get one lot right, and they send them back to China and bring another lot, and we have to start all over again.
Clifford says criticism of Chinese firms' safety standards is misplaced, and that if government laws require safety measures, the Chinese employers will abide by them. Erwin Wong, whose family owns a chain of grocery stores in Johannesburg, says criticism of Chinese businesses in Africa may not be just misplaced, but racist.
For the local Chinese anyway, we got used to that. We got used to always being excluded. We got used to always being seen as the outsider trying to come in. So it was, we do get angry when we do see those things, because we do see it being purely unfair, and that's why I use the word maybe even racist, because why we cannot understand, why can another country or other countries in the Western world do that? But soon as a Chinese company come here and does that, then it's so negative against the Chinese. We feel that is very, very unfair for us, and we feel hurt.
Erwin Wong was born here and says he has been discriminated against his whole life.
All the kids at school would tell you you're different. They would call you names, they would assume you know karate, and then they would try and beat you up, and they would.
But he says with China's rising economic profile in Africa, Chinese immigrants are getting more recognition.
It's been very different for us, especially these last 5 years now, seeing with the amount of Chinese investment into Africa. There's been the positive as well as the negative aspects of it. The positive aspects of it sometimes is that in a way you get a lot more respect now.
There's no question that Africa is receiving a lot more attention because of the competition for resources between China and the United States. This attention will no doubt bring in a lot more aid, money, and military support. Whether any of this actually improves everyday Africans' lives remains to be seen.
Now reporting on the race for resources in Africa, here's correspondent Shannon Van Sant.
We are in
Now reporting on the race for resources in Africa, here's correspondent Shannon Van Sant.